Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2. And today's first panel discussion will focus on the international and regional cooperation. As we know, most of our governments having developed their own nice e-government strategies and implementing it, but it sometimes looks that just to do it for one country is not maybe economically feasible, and there could be much more what we can share between the governments, also both technically, organizationally, legislation-wise, and develop various kinds of cooperations internationally, but also regionally. So our panel will focus on the cooperation models, and especially regional cooperation models. And I have honor now to invite to the stage 3 great panelists. And the first one is Mr. Melford Nicholas, who is Minister of Information, Broadcasting and Telecommunication Technology of Antigua and Barbuda. Welcome. It was a long way to fly here. The second panelist is Mr. Mohammad Hedayati, Deputy Minister of Ministry of Communications and IT from Afghanistan. Welcome. And the third panelist is Mr. Irvin Halman, who is General Administrator of a National Authority of Government Innovations from Panama. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Hans.
So, welcome to Estonia, and thank you for having those really long flights from Panama, from Antigua, from Afghanistan. I have been in all those countries, and I know what is the effort to get there, or even more to get from there to here. So I hope you're not very much jet-lagged and still awake. So let us start the discussion from the point of view of a regional cooperation, and I know you are experienced on it. So we have 3 regions here. Panama represents Latin America cooperation region. Either it's in Central America, so it may look like that either they are in North or South or in Caribbeans or right in Pacific or Atlantic, but they have canal what connects everything. So Latin America, we have Caribbean region, what is very active also in the cooperation with various models, and we have Afghanistan, what is like a central hub for Central Asia region, a very complicated region as we can all imagine. So, but let's start from Irvin. How it works? What is the regional cooperation for Latin America? So you can explain it in Spanish, but no one will understand it probably.
Okay. Well, in fact, it's very exciting times that we're living right now, and by the way, this connection that we have with Estonia, is helping us a lot. Panama is right now presiding the Latin American e-government network. And includes also the Caribbean, so Latin American Caribbean. And yes, we're part of Central America. We have the Panama Canal. And we share annually with 22 ministers, basically members of the OAS, the Organization of American States. We share best practices. We have working groups. So we're pretty active. We have been 15 years at this. And lately, we have included Estonian speakers at the meetings. We're going to be holding our regional meeting this year in November in Panama, and that's where we start. We make sort of we establish actions that we want to work throughout the following year, in which in collaboration among the many countries. We have invited guests also that participate at the e-government meetings, and we also have an executive committee that looks at what are those things that are emerging that countries should be looking at, and that we need to raise to the highest levels of government to consider in digital government. And for example, this year we're going to be focusing on the value of digital government. Getting outside from the technology, technology has to have a purpose, as we have talked about in these 2 days, adoption, use, and how it can be effective for society. So we want to instill in the ministers of finance the importance and the value of digital government, as they're the ones that are prioritizing the investment. So if they understand how digital government can save, can be effective in governance for government and for society, we will be accomplishing a goal. So we have to raise the visibility of digital government, which we're already doing at the Organization of American States level.
Thank you, Irvin. Melford, how you do with cooperation in Caribbeans?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm thankful for being here, and I tip my hat off to your lovely country and its 100th year of independence. I'm sporting one of your tags. But apart from that, we have embarked on a program within the Caribbean community that I'm from. There's a body called the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, of which I've recently become its president. And that group has been charged with driving the process forward. In January of this year, we had a major summit in Antigua of Caribbean leaders that had included approximately 8 leaders of the Caribbean, including prime ministers and other heads of state. And that was followed by a workshop of practitioners, of technicians, looking at the whole question of what we style as 21st century government. And we have embarked on an ambitious digital agenda for each of the CARICOM member states. But we have recognized that we are all at different starting points. So one of the first things that had happened, we had developed a template to be able to conduct an audit in each of these different countries. And from that standpoint, we're able to determine where each country is on the continuum, because various developments would have taken place within country at different stages. But we now have some functional cooperation at the Caribbean Telecommunications Union level. We have embraced the support from the e-Government Academy here in Estonia. Of course, Hannes, you have been to Antigua at least on 2 occasions. And there is an intention that perhaps maybe you should join us at the CARICOM Summit in Jamaica later this year. But the whole idea behind what we're attempting to do is to look at best practices globally, and clearly looking at what you're doing here in Estonia. Certainly, I have been to the neighboring country of Georgia as well last year. They have some development looking at that. As a matter of fact, last evening, I believe that the Georgian government had extended an invitation to the sub-regional group in the region called the OECS, of which I've been made the functional head to represent the interests of the Caribbean in that bilateral arrangement. But we have certainly come some distance, and there is every pledge that there should be some functional cooperation amongst member states of CARICOM, not only in terms of having a shared costs with respect to some of the infrastructure that is going to be required to effect this full digitalization of our governments, but recognizing that we are smaller countries and we may not all have within our borders the necessary human resource capacity. So we certainly look to each other for that type of support, and certainly look elsewhere, like in states like Estonia and Georgia. And we have certainly been a part of the wider Latin America and the Caribbean region in terms of this functional cooperation. So we are building up some steam, I would say, Hannes, and I imagine over the remaining 4 years, 5 years, that many of the Caribbean territories will emerge as Caribbean tigers in this whole notion of transforming their governments to digitally driven bureaucracies.
Thank you, Melford. Mohammad, how it goes in Central Asia?
Yeah, first I would like to thank you for inviting me here. Actually, I'm the product of cooperation myself. So the cooperation we had from Tallinn University and Kabul University, and that time I was the pro-rector of Kabul University, the biggest national university. So I got my PhD here from Tallinn University. And regard to your question, Afghanistan is popular as a conflict country and is low land area, and it can play a very vital role for the regional connectivity. So our neighboring country like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, and China, they think that Afghanistan can play a hub for their connectivity. So we have a huge project called Digital CASA. CASA stands for Central Asia to South Asia. So the main objective of this project is to connect Central Asian countries to the south part of Asian countries. So it plays like a highway of data. So it is funded by the World Bank, and the feasibility study is there, so we have some connectivity there. And now data can pass through Afghanistan to the south part of Asian countries. So we had very good collaboration with the region with regard to the infrastructure, with regard to the capacity building, with regard to the like even for the education development. So we have very good friendship with India. So annually we send our students, our staff for the capacity building, and they train in the ICT field. India is very developed for the software development. And also we have very good friendship with China with regard to development of infrastructure. So now we have the internal intranet to manage local data traffic, and we hope to have secure network. So right now, apart of that, we have very good connection with Azerbaijan, the same program that they have in Azerbaijan, Asan service. We have Asan Khidmat, the same word translated. So we have around more than 30 services which is available for our citizens. And now Afghan citizens started to have EID card, and through that they can receive the e-services.
Thank you. Sounds very promising. Melford, maybe you can describe us also. You said that there is a good cooperation already, and definitely policies are discussed. Caribbeans, and especially Eastern Caribbean countries, are doing a lot of cooperation already. You have joint currency, you are having central bank, what unites, I think, 8 countries in Eastern Caribbean.
That's correct.
Yeah. So do you also think about like harmonizing policies or doing something what covers the region, or at least part of a region? Because what we have learned here in European Union, that to create the single digital market, you need to have like joint regulations. And it has been painful process in Europe, because there is 28 countries, and some of them are very big and some of them are very small, so you need to find consensus. What sometimes is just, joint lower nominators means that you just can agree something, but not everything. So is there any plans for this kind of broader cooperation, also harmonizing policies, legislation, and creating more like single market also?
Well, yes, the whole idea of having a single ICT space within the Caribbean community has been discussed, and I think it had been pursued for the past, I would say, 5 years. And I think there has been some progress with respect to that whole framework that would include a common legislative agenda. And I can safely tell you that within the subgrouping that's called within the Eastern Caribbean, that's called the OECS, there is every bit promulgation of harmonized legislation dealing with aspects with respect to data protection and privacy, and the legal framework that is going to be necessary to proceed with a digital agenda. Yes, so there is harmonization at the legislative level.
How this process has been? Is it? I think the harmonization itself is a big challenge, but even to get governments aware that let's do it jointly, how it happens, how long it takes that they started to understand that there is a need for cooperation at all?
I will tell you that within the OECS, and last evening at a dinner that we had at your very nice facility, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia and I had a discussion, and we were comparing how much easier it is to get functional cooperation within the OECS as opposed to the wider CARICOM region. So from a standpoint of getting a success model within the Caribbean itself, I think the OECS region as a foundation place is going to be our best bet. Legislation, having common legislation, is not something that is alien to us. Certainly, with respect to the banking community, with one central bank, oftentimes the promotion of new legislation for common practices is promoted by the central bank. We have had some recently, and each of the individual parliaments had to enact that same legislation, and it has taken place rather seamlessly. And I can tell you that with respect to some of the other bits of legislation that are necessary, that has actually happened within the OECS. More than 18 years ago, several of the OECS territories formed together and had a common policy with respect to telecommunications and competition. So there is every bit a historical basis for that level of cooperation. And so I don't think it's going to present us a challenge going forward.
Thank you. About Latin America, countries are much, much bigger than in Caribbeans. So is there any discussions of harmonizing regulations or at least taking over some better parts?
Yeah, we do not escape from the trade flows and cross-border activities, and as to migration and logistics, health, and so forth. So part of the conversations we're having is how we can use exchange data, the digital identity, the electronic signature, how can be recognized in different countries, and that's a starting position. Also, we're looking at cybersecurity. I'm glad to be in Estonia because now I feel, Panama is almost 4 million people, so we feel like 4 times the size of Estonia, when generally in Latin America we're very small compared to Mexico and Brazil. So we're more relate more to the Caribbean countries, but it's the interesting things about countries of the size of Panama and Estonia is that we can be labs, innovation labs. It's easier to build consensus, among many of our countries, to work together and learn from the best. In that sense, we're getting a lot of cooperation from countries. We used to work with, much larger countries. For example, Korea helped us with the master plan, but scaling down from very large countries to small countries, can be a challenge, a very specific issue. So we're finding that we get large country collaboration, mid-sized country collaboration, small. We can relate better. It's more bite-sized, and in that sense, also the United Nations is supporting these efforts. The International Development Bank. Lately, the OECD is also participating in some of these meetings, so we can benchmark, against the best, but then adapt to the local needs. And we're starting to even export some of the local solutions within countries. So we're doing co-creation among the countries, so we can find the right solutions for the size of our countries, and that has been a good experience that we have had in sharing those best practices and knowledge gain in digital government and e-government in the countries. So we look forward to more of this happening, and we're with the Caribbean. We're Dominican Republic, Jamaica, fully all the countries in the Caribbean. We can bring the region closer together.
Yeah. What was mentioned, like big countries, small countries. If you're discussing about the cooperation and let's say even also harmonization exercises, or is it in Latin American region there are really huge countries like Brazil, Argentina, and really small ones like Panama. What I've as we discussed, Panama is comparing to Estonia very big, and for Caribbean region it's a big country. So, but is it like obstacle sometimes that some countries are too big and some countries are small? What is your feeling, Irvin?
It's one of the sizes is how the governance structure in the countries is. It takes place. We tend to be very centralized countries. The smaller ones, larger ones have more local governments, more federated, and the decision-making system, can be more complex.
Yeah.
The issues may be similar, so it's a matter of scaling up, scaling down, and how to adapt the technology to specific circumstances. At the end, we all want the same. We're looking, and that's where building consensus on what to measure, what the objective, what the goals should be, gives us a good reference to the countries to start moving and advancing together, because that's where we level. That's where we level off in policy making.
Yeah, Melford, please.
I wanted to add a bit to that, Hannes, because one of the observations that I had made when I came to government 4 years ago is that the telecommunications entities that operated in Latin America and the Caribbean were the ones that were primarily driving the digital agenda.
Okay.
And they were driving that with purposes to satisfy their own ends. I think it is only latterly that Caribbean governments and regional governments have become aware, based on the examples that have been etched into our process by countries like Estonia. But more importantly, we've recognized that to be competitive globally, we are measured against certain other criteria, like the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. And clearly, that has awakened the consciousness of many of the governments in the region to say, wait a minute, if we're going to fall behind because we're not doing anything, we have to become aware now that we have to reinvent ourselves. And clearly, there's a bit of a catch-up, but from a conscious position that we have to now join the conversation and drive the policy and to have collaborative engagement with the other industry players. I will be in Panama in July of this year at an industry conference driven by the private sector. But clearly, I will be bringing to that discussion the perspectives of the regional governments in terms of what we want to see for that digital agenda for the Caribbean.
Yes.
And Latin America.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in the topic of telecoms and banks who are really, at least in some directions, driving also the digital transformation, because without them we hardly can build up the connectivity with citizens and businesses. So this is valuable what they do, and definitely the question is how to encourage to do them with the supportive regulations or license fees and all these licensing policies. What is the right of a government to decide? And then also what we learned, at least in Estonia, that the banks are also good drivers. So if the banks are making their digital transformation and putting their services online, so they, first of all, they need to develop also good identification tools, so even government can share those opportunities, how all those identification tools to use it for the login for the government services also. this is how it started here in Estonia. And also an important thing, by my opinion, is that banks could really build up a lot of trust also. If online banking gets trustful and people really see that this money, what is not anymore like in cash coupons or coins, but it's somehow just virtual. And it's not stolen where, either it's virtual. It really creates trust towards whatever is digital. So, so I think also banks have very important role. And even more, in the regional, we know that many telecoms are getting bigger and bigger. So they do not cover usually one country, they are covering the region. So their policies and practices actually affect very much countries also. So the question is how to cooperate with them. So Mohammad, what is your cooperation experience with banks, telecoms, and other like basically infrastructure companies in Afghanistan to develop a digital society and cooperation?
Well, thank you very much. So Afghanistan has a diversity situation. So most of the energy is spent on the physical security rather than cyber security. We just started the mobile payment for the police. Our police can receive nowadays from the bank their salary through their mobile. And also the second project that we started, and it is done for the retirement of the government employee. They can receive annual salary through their mobile system, and they can transfer the money through their mobile. I would like to tell you some of the experiences in Afghanistan with regard to cooperation. So we have received a lot of cooperation to Afghanistan, but it is somehow we consider as like eating the fish, not learn how to catch the fish. So the sustainability of such projects is not, remained there. When the project finished and the donor and the supporter has gone and left, so we were not able to continue. But after the new government, so our president, Dr. Ashraf Ghani, is very keen to lead all projects of ICT by our nation. So this is the good thing that we now consider it. So the bank, people can trust and can have the faith, as you say, slowly, but it takes time for Afghanistan.
Yeah, but cooperation with telecoms, is it how it goes in Afghanistan?
Right now we have 6 mobile operator companies. One of them is government, and 5 of them is private, and they invested a lot, around 1 billion USD, and since 2001 they are starting offering the services. So a little bit the cost is expensive, but now we try to bring different connectivity from different regions. We mainly had connection from Pakistan, but now we have connection from China, from Turkmenistan, from Tajikistan. So definitely it affects the cost and quality and the security as well, because our neighbor Pakistan has somehow, we are not trust on them, because maybe they can do something, but still we are hope to have a different side connectivity. So this is the experience that we have. And also for the private sector, so when they invest a lot of money, so it is a good opportunity for our youth, which they have competency of ICT, they can get hired there. Around 10,000 people got the job in the ICT sector.
Thank you. How it goes in Latin America, or a huge telecoms, it's hard to imagine either how big they are.
Yeah, well, Mexico, for example, just broke up a monopoly there was in telecommunications.
Slim, Carlos Slim.
Yeah,
Carlos Slim is broken apart.
And that broke, and that was a bold move, and also we're going through the challenge in many of the countries where you may have more telcos than when for the size of the country. that can be where you can have an interesting market for each of the telcos that participate. We had an interesting experience in Panama where in the past we wouldn't get collaboration among the telcos, and there was a lot of that puts a lot of competitive pressure because you either win or lose all. And through an architecture that we worked through this year and in this period with the telcos, we said, we have a national project. The national project is to connect as many people, even in the rural areas. Now, we're going to design a tender that we're going to divide the country in several regions and have a core administrative system so that we can whoever wins in a region can connect to that core system. And then we can have one system to connect all citizens. So we doubled the capacity, we doubled the speed, and we had several winners. So it was not a winner-take-all or a high-stake competition. So we feel the telcos are now in an environment where if we find the right architectures, they can all compete, and that's better for the country. It's win-win. And so we're getting, this year, we're going to, in January, we're going to have the Pope visiting Panama. As it was in Poland, that's a youth meeting. Now, for Panama, we expect about maybe 500,000 to 1 million people coming into a 4 million people country. So that's a substantial increase. So we're working with the telcos again on a national project so that we all can chip in and do for its best in the country, and then they can compete on a commercial, residential, and in other ways. We're mapping with them all government needs. So in the way we share information with them, we can get more network connectivity and use. And I think in that sense, that's better for the country. That's the way we're managing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you share, you are getting more back, actually.
Yeah. Hannes, just by way of regional comparison, I know from day one, you had emphasized, or various presenters had emphasized, that the banks here in Estonia had been at the forefront of this whole process and have driven the governments to get involved and actually take over the whole digital agenda. Within the Caribbean region where I'm from, the banks find themselves in a lesser position, in the sense that they are playing a defense because within the Caribbean region there are a number of offshore entities that part of the economy is driven by the offshore financial sector, services sector. And that has not endeared the Caribbean region to the OECD, who perceives the Caribbean region to be an harmful tax environment. And so clearly banking policy is driven by the need to satisfy or to placate the will of the very powerful OECD countries. So the region where I'm from right now, we are affected by some of those policies to the extent that many of the correspondent banking relations between the Caribbean and, let's say, our major trading partners in the United States are coming under increased stress. And more and more of the correspondent banks in the United States are pursuing policies that are being referred to as de-risking. And so it has presented some peculiar problems for us in the Caribbean. I'm hoping that once we continue to pursue this whole digital agenda and we get to the position where, like you have here in Estonia or like you have in Georgia, like there is present in Georgia, every citizen has a digital identity. And it can really go a long way in helping some of these commercial banks to improve their know their customer and know their customer's customer. benefit. It can help to change some of the perspectives that the OECD has and maintain certain harmful policies to the rest of economic life in the Caribbean. So I think from that standpoint as well, it's really going to be good for us to drive this process forward to get the back-end benefit of improving our banking relations with the rest of the global financial community.
Yeah, thank you. Totally agree. And let us touch the last point, what already Irvin little bit opened, that is there opportunity that you regionally also share some physical digital infrastructure? You mentioned already that you discuss it with the telecoms, that they can share the infrastructure because it might be too costly for one country only to build up. But what about digital government infrastructure? Has been there discussions to do something jointly or share it? And another part of the question, that are governments like mentally ready to go for the sharing of infrastructure, also digital government infrastructure? Because we know that usual mindset of a government is that I need to own everything in my cellar, what I call data center. Maybe it's not even look like a data center, but I need to own everything, and I'd like to have more hardware as much as possible. If you're looking to the companies, everyone is trying to put their data and keep it on cloud just to reduce the numbers and costs for the infrastructure and risks about the infrastructure. So what do you feel? What is going on in your regions, and is there any of this kind of developments or at least discussions to go for the sharing also the e-government infrastructure? Mohammad.
Thank you. As I already mentioned, that Afghanistan is going to be a hub for the regional connectivity, and this somehow play economic role for our development and also for the region. For the ICT telecom services, so as government we have we own actually the infrastructure, but recently we developed the open access policy, which by that the private sector can use the infrastructure, mainly the fiber optic network. So this is a good opportunity for the private sector in my country, that they can use the existing infrastructure rather than developing their own network. So this is somehow the good opportunity for them.
I agree. Melford.
I think the whole idea is going to be driven as well by some of those same considerations that Mohammad just spoke about in terms of time and costs. To get to the frontier, there's a limited amount of time that we're going to have to do that. And so to reinvent the wheel and for each one to build the government on the basis of its own silo, I think we're going to be taught by the events in the moment that we cannot afford to do that. I think my country, Antigua and Barbuda, is positioned to become one of the regional centers of excellence, and there is every bit an intention, and I've certainly expressed it at the summit in Antigua in January of this year, that we intend to share. We have benefited from collaboration with other states, regional and internationally, and so we intend to share. So any infrastructure that we put in place that can be scaled up to allow neighboring countries to participate at low cost and increase the time for adoption, to improve the time for adoption, we'll certainly be in a position to do that. And of course, as more persons join our own network, it will also reduce the operating costs as well for us. So I think that is going to be what's going to drive it, the need to get to the frontier in very quick order. We do not have a lot of time because we have to remain competitive, because the international forces, comparison and the World Bank and other OECD charts are going to force us to become competitive very quickly. And I think that's going to be the main driver that's going to force us to collaborate.
And also there is a really great risk, especially in Caribbean region, of a natural disasters, what actually can wipe off everything.
So we have to have some diversity and resiliency built into it as well.
Yes, and share the risk somehow, yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. How it goes in Latin America? What is like Latin culture around the sharing?
That's a good question. I want to say, I think last night when we were at dinner, you know, I mentioned either to you or somebody else, you know, in experimenting is something that Estonia and Estonian society has accepted. And has accepted also failure and
Partly.
well, partly
And not for a government.
Well, that's what we hear in Latin America, you know, from Estonia, and that you try until you perfect. At least society, you know, demands that on government. In Latin America, if we experiment and we fail, that's it, you know.
You're a dead man.
We're dead man. So we have to. That's why, you know, sharing, you know, gives us, you know, more comfort in being able to experiment with a higher success rate. Now, I also want to say that in deploying technologies and clouds and so forth, we also have the same problem. You know, we started our Cloud 1.0 started with it's, you know, I'm locating it in a data center, but I want to see it, feel it, touch it. It's my iron or my hardware. And now we're moving to the Cloud 2.0, which is, okay, you know, I can use your premises, and but it's you know, it's still, you know, have to have some boundaries. So eventually we can go to more public clouds, but it's an evolving process. You know, we have to feel, you know, a trusting environment in order to do that kind of deployment, but we believe in Panama that it has to be a working relationship, private sector, public sector, and sometimes and even trying to break barriers within government. It's not only government, private sector. Sometimes it's
Inside government.
Inside government, and the silos. I mean, that's what we talk about all the time. And sharing my data. That's why the collaboration we're having with Estonia, you know, and recently signed an MOU with EGA to learn more about how X-Road has helped you know, preserve some databases, but sharing information in a secure way. Also for the health, notaries, and so forth. You know, being able to see, feel, and touch the future helps us in our countries to move in the right direction, you know, with a more strong foothold, and to be able to experiment and to move to the higher levels of technology in a way that it makes sense for each of our countries and societies. And this, again, this progress, you can only advance as so much as the circumstances allows. Sometimes I tell, you know, I tell politicians and people in private sector and in society, technology can do anything you want. Sometimes it's the legal system, the capacity to accept change, what's the main barrier, because
change
technology is not a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Change management.
Yeah, change management is an issue. So, ladies and gentlemen, we had a great panel and great discussion around the cooperation and sharing models, and we see that globally in Asia, in Caribbean, in America, in Europe, the cooperation also in digital transformation and the government is getting more important, because everyone understands that the cooperation is the power. It's not taking out from us anything, but adding value to the things what we do. So I'd like to thank the panelists of our great discussion, Mohammad Hedayati from Afghanistan, Melford Nicholas, Minister of Information from Antigua and Barbuda, and Irvin Halman, General Administrator of the National Authority of Government Innovation in Panama. So thank you very much. Give them a warm applause for this great discussion. And thank you very much for joining us at stage and in the hall. Thank you very much.